Well, this is Shaw coming back on the channel to talk about Chivalry Chapter 3. Boy, good stuff. I was glad to get him back on to talk about this. Hey, if you're liking this content, give me a like, subscribe, and give me some comments below on this. This is a really profound chapter. Let's get to it. Chapter 3, though, in the book Chivalry, Whatever Happened to Chivalry? Now, we hear about, and he brings this up in the chapter a lot about, you hear all the time on the news and from even people you know. Oh, what happened to chivalry? There's no men that are chivalrous anymore. Blah, blah, blah,
Chivalry
blah,
is
blah.
dead.
Chivalry's dead. Yeah. And he makes the argument no, chivalry is still alive and well in most men, but it's shifted to another place too, which is very interesting that he talks about in this chapter. But he does say he admits, like in the first opening paragraphs, he says that to be sure, chivalry by individual men is on the decline. Um, and everybody denounces this. They say this is terrible, blah, 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 except for maybe younger people, younger men at least. I don't
I
think.
would say both sides of the political aisle, whether it's, sort of your liberal folks or whether it's conservative tradcon types, both of them seem to
Mhm.
lament this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They're saying that men are becoming selfish pigs. MRAs, men's rights activists, or MGTOW, men going their own way. They choose to summarize it differently that men are sick of being exploited and have chosen to shed their unnecessary selfishness. Or, no, sorry, selflessness. To shed
Selflessness.
that
Yeah.
unnecessary selflessness.
Yeah. I
Or,
like that part. And it's interesting too, because this book was written some years back now, but this is still the same conversation really we're having today. And
yeah.
most guys are kind of looking at, what feminism has done to impact our society.
Mm,
And on the one hand, a lot of men have still stepped into a chivalrous role, especially because they're being enculturated that way, if I use that word correctly.
yeah.
But then they usually find they're just kind of shooting themselves in the foot. So enough guys have just been like, I'm done with this, especially when they take the chivalrous route, then they find themselves in family court or something, or
Well,
it's
even
not even
before
just
you get
family court.
there,
Yeah.
before you get even to that point, I think
Yeah.
men know intrinsically that chivalry does not attract a woman. Like we've
Yeah.
been taught it does, but if you like learn some of the basics of game theory and that, it's like
hmm
you do basically the opposite of chivalry, and that's actually what gets women's attention and that holds their attention, which
That's
is
what, well, it seems like that's what especially uh you could say trad cons and even folks like both sides of the aisle are like the same on this. They hate that. They hate that guys have figured out how to cultivate attraction in that way. And a lot of that is to the credit of, the pickup artists or your sort of intersexual dynamic part of Red Pill.
yeah,
And they found that out. And, a lot of people were kind of raised with this promise of, well, if you just do these things, then you're going to get a wife and your woman's going to want you every day and all these kinds of things. And then they find out that that's not true, or they end up in a dead bedroom, or the attraction diminishes. And then
yeah,
suddenly they're reading these guys' forums and they're like, huh, what's dread game or this or that or competition anxiety. And then suddenly it's working. And then it's so hard for them to deny. It's like, wow, I seen it work right in front of my face.
yeah, yeah. It's like society tells me one thing that we know doesn't work
hmm
unless the woman's already attracted to you. Then this is just kind of the cherry on top. Oh, he opens doors and all this stuff. But an unattractive guy, it doesn't matter what he does in the chivalric realm. Oh, he puts his
hmm
coat over the mud puddles or whatever and does all this stuff. It doesn't matter. She won't want him
The
because it
sad
doesn't
part
work.
is even when the initial attraction is there after a long enough time, even that guy it'll go away or she'll get bored or it'll give him the
Yeah,
ick on some long enough timeline.
yeah.
So it is a real phenomena that we see. And I almost don't blame them because it's just like, well, if you're pedestalized and brought up to be this entitled for so long,
Mm.
they're gonna want to seek, I guess, novelty or whatever's different. And it's
Oh,
just
yeah.
it's almost like you can't escape nature. So it's like you think you got everything perfect and the guys are trained to be this way, but there's just this part in you that maybe knows something is wrong and it manifests that way.
Well, yeah, and he even talks about how there used to be etiquette manuals for men on how a man's to take off his hat in a woman's presence,
Hmm.
shake her hand a certain way, open doors for her, buy her gifts, and assist her in whatever way he can. And he's saying that the message in these gestures is deference to the superiority of females. Now that is why I hate chivalry so much because it's antithetical to biblical values. Like it
Yeah.
turns biblical values on their head and what we're taught in the Bible of what like a Christian male and female relationship should be. Like the Bible teaches that a wife should reverence her husband. That's in the New Testament, Ephesians chapter 5 says like the wife should reverence her husband. And then in I think it's First Corinthians, it talks about how the man is the glory of God is man, and the glory of man is woman. So there's this hierarchy that like she is the glory of man, then like
Um,
so there's this idea that we just invert with chivalry
oh
that
yeah.
in effect like we should actually if we were going to practice like in the church if we were going to practice what actually reflects biblical values, it should be like when a man walks in a room, the women should all stand up because he is to be respected, right?
Yeah.
Or even, I mean, this is totally ridiculous, but or at least to our chivalric minds, it's totally ridiculous. But even like women should actually be holding doors for men to show reverence to them. You know, things like this, but we would just say like, wow, that is completely ridiculous if,
Yeah. It sounds so foreign to us. I mean,
yeah.
and not even just from another place, but it just doesn't even compute.
So even a friend of mine, he was in India, and he's a
Mhm.
missionary. He was with some other pastors there in India, and he just thought it was so crazy that in India, the women, all the men sit down at a table, the
Mhm.
women serve the men their food,
Mhm.
and then they stand for, I don't, probably not the entire meal, but they stand for a significant amount of time as the men
Attending to
talk
them.
and eat
Yeah.
to just kind of be there for them. And then I think
Yep.
they kind of filter out and eat the meal. And he just thought like, oh,
That's like
this
unheard of
is
over
so
here.
bad. Blah blah. And I
Yeah,
was
it's
like,
unheard of.
yeah, yeah. He's like, oh, this is so demeaning to these women,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. But it's like, no, that actually reflects what the Bible says about husband, wife, and the hierarchy of male female relationship there. But our minds have been just so psyoped by chivalry that we just can't
Yeah.
see it anymore.
It's gone so far down that road. It's like unconscionable.
Yeah.
It's unconscionable, or it even seems uncivilized. And part of early chivalry too was kind of, I guess, part of its claim is, oh, you're taking these kind of boisterous men and teaching them how to have manners, and this is how you're supposed to treat a lady. The one
Yeah.
thing that's really interesting to me is that it goes from it's one thing to, I guess, show a type of chivalry to your own kin, you can say,
Yeah.
but then there's also the extension of any woman that you
Yeah.
see, whether related or not, and just, you can offer them your carriage or something like that, even if you have no idea who this is. And I mean, yeah, women can be dangerous too. I mean, a stranger danger, whoever it happens to be, it's just
Yeah.
kind of that's the part where I think it also really jumps over is it's just like, no, all men and all women. And even when you hear, these folks nowadays talking about it, or men are so feminized, usually what they're kind of saying is men aren't chivalrous, or men aren't being
Oh,
chivalrous, or they're not giving us these due entitlements that they believe are due to them. But men are just like, oh, we've been disrespected for so long, we don't really feel like doing this anymore. And then it's
yeah.
just like the
Yeah.
biggest issue.
Yeah.
Men are feminized now. They're not being taught how to be men. And but what they usually mean
They're
by
not
that
a
is being
real
chivalrous.
man. They're just not a
Exactly.
real man, you
A
know.
real man would have defended me against some stranger that, this guy has no idea who he is or who I am. And
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and he talks about that where he says not only should he be ready to protect, but desirous to please and willing to sacrifice much of his own personal ease and comfort,
Mhm.
if by doing so he can increase those of any female in whose company he may find himself. And like I think men are rightly saying, especially young men, are like, why? Why would I do this?
Why
Like,
would I do that?
what is in it for me if I do this illogical thing here?
I I always have this thing like I don't know if you've ever used Instagram or TikTok, but I always imagine what if somebody made a short and the short was what would happen if the Titanic sank in 2025? And
Mm,
back then, it's like okay, ladies first and the height of
yeah.
chivalry. And then now it's like, well, wait a minute, we're equal. So how are we going to do the lifeboats? Is it going to be, by lottery or this or that? It's just I don't know. It's even beyond just the chivalry. Like everything is just so mixed up and mashed together and sort of swirled together that it nothing
Yeah.
makes sense anymore.
Well, there was articles
Yeah.
about that did happen where there was a fairly large, I think it was a cruise ship that sunk.
Mhm.
And yeah, the men weren't signing up just to go down with the ship. Like, and
Really?
that was the big question was, what happened to chivalry? This is so horrible. Blah, 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 blah. And the men were like, yeah. When he even talks about that in the chapter, he says one reason for a decline of male chivalry is the vanishing payoff. Because
Yeah,
men are saying, what is the payoff for doing this? He says women no longer reciprocate for chivalry with good old-fashioned gestures like cooking, homemaking, praise,
sure.
and affection that
Yeah.
would have occurred in days past. They don't do that anymore.
Yeah,
So,
the ladylike behavior or whatever, maybe they were brought up with that at least back then to kind of match some chivalry is has
yeah,
been kind of replaced by the boss babe thing and this kind of Schrodinger's feminism of sometimes I'm the boss babe, sometimes I'm the damsel in
yeah,
distress.
yeah, you can't
Um,
have it all ways. He
yeah,
says they don't even respond with a thank you most times.
that's another insidious thing about chivalry too, is like a lot of it I think is built on this promise of, well, if I do these things, then it's going to make her like me or make her desire me, or there's this alternative
Yeah,
motive almost to be chivalry, excuse me, to be chivalrous.
yeah,
And that's kind of reflected in a lot of, even when you look at kind of the older PUA stuff or just manosphere discussions about guys who would be in the friend zone or they find themselves in the friend zone and it turns out they liked him the whole time or something. And instead of being
yeah.
more upfront and direct, there is this kind of virtue signaling that comes with chivalry that's kind of gross in its own way. And
Mm.
it almost creates this kind of,
Covert contract?
well, it's a covert contract, but it's also an enmity between men themselves because people are trying to virtue signal on other men and police them and say, "Hey, you better do this," or
Yeah, the
or
white
else, or
knighting.
hey,
Yeah,
there's a lady here. Yeah, the white knighting, exactly. There's a how come you're
yeah,
not giving up your seat? You know what I mean? And poor
yeah.
guys come out of nowhere to forcibly remove you from the seat. So,
I've actually had that happen where it was at it was at a school
hey,
event.
don't you know how to treat a lady?
Well, it was at a school event for my let's see, I think it was my son. So I went, it was like to a planetarium or whatever. So there was a
Okay.
lot of parents there, mostly moms, but there's a few dads. And
Yeah.
we were going to sit down in the planetarium, and there was, as far as I could tell, there was plenty of seats. So I just went ahead and sat down, and some of the men were like, "Oh, you should let the ladies sit down," blah blah. And I just told them, I said, "Hey, we're all equal here. It's all good." And I just went and sat down,
They're
and
probably so like they couldn't. They were shocked probably.
yeah, yeah, because I was like, "What?" And the dumb thing was there was plenty of seats anyway. It wasn't like there was three seats or something. It was like,
Yeah,
okay, you can stand in the back. I don't care. Like, whatever.
yeah. This is the well. Just to read that paragraph, it says one reason for a decline of male chivalry is the vanishing payoff. Women no
Mhm.
longer reciprocate for chivalry via good old-fashioned gestures like cooking, homemaking, praise, and affection that would have occurred at the time the above comments were penned. Today, they don't even receive a thank you. Is it any wonder men are seeing chivalry as a bad deal? The meal ticket, the flowers, the slaving out a job, the deference is all better spent on oneself. And I
Mhm.
mean, that is what you're seeing with a lot of guys. And to be honest, most guys, if they look at that or they're saying, this is kind of hopeless, men can be very simple. Like they don't require that much to move
Please.
along, so to speak. And society really hates that because with less productive men, that could even almost be a death sentence. If men just collectively say we're not doing this anymore, which a lot of them are,
Mhm.
that would put the fear of God in a lot of folks.
Well, even I was listening to Paul Elam past couple of days, and he said, "Man, I forgot the percentage, but it was a very high percentage of young men that aren't even trying to go on dates with.
Yeah.
They're just like." They're saying like that last sentence that the deference is all better spent on yourself, and they're not even trying anymore. Man, I wish I could remember the percentage of whatever stat he was looking at, but it was kind of shocking to me. Like, man, there's that few men
Yeah.
that are pursuing women at all. Like,
Yeah. I mean, we could
wow,
barely, like if people aren't even getting together for a date, like family creation is
yeah,
way down the line. That's
you're done.
it's bad news over here.
Yeah. Um, So he does go now. This is where he shifts in the chapter. This is where I thought it was really good. But he says
Yeah.
his observation, I guess this is probably Peter Wright,
Hmm.
is that women have corralled a rich new source of chivalry. So individual men are not giving chivalry nearly as much as they used to. Even though I think they still give it out in some
It's
ways.
institutionalized.
Yeah.
I don't want to call it a forced chivalry, but yeah, you can say that. It's there.
But now he's saying it goes from husband or maybe boyfriend or whatever to Uncle Sam. And then he lays out in the rest of the chapter how chivalry has now shifted from husband to Uncle Sam, which is really profound.
That that part I really like. It is a very profound thing, and it really kind of explains too why men are especially feeling, I guess you can say, maybe left out or walking away because the state has taken the responsibility of chivalry, you can say, as funded from taxpayers, for men basically,
Mm,
and
yeah,
women are able to appeal to the state more as this kind of chivalrous thing instead of individual men in their life. So there really is no need for etiquette or thank yous from the women at all because to them an individual man is just not, maybe they don't see it coming from them or they just don't care, but they know it's
yeah,
guaranteed from the state, which, the state is made up of the taxpayers. And then, he gets into discussions about the voter base here and about how in the 1992 presidential election, he's quoting Warren Farrell from
yeah,
Warren Farrell's Myth of Male Power. And he says, but practically speaking, the American legal system cannot be separated from the voter. And in the 1992 presidential election, 54% of the voters were female, 46% were male. Women's votes outnumber men's by more than 7 million. Overall, a
mm,
legislator is to a voter what a chauffeur is to the employer. Both look like they're in charge, but both can be fired if they don't go where they're told. When legislators do not appear to be protecting women, it is almost always because women differ on what constitutes protection.
mm,
For example, women voted almost equally for Republicans and Democrats during the combination of the four presidential elections prior to Clinton. But he goes on here. But the point is that the state, and as represented by the different politicians there, are all kind of come out with these talking points that are very chivalrous and they really do appeal to women. And it's because
yeah.
they're kind of beholden to their voting block power.
Yeah, and that's why I think we'll never see abortion go away fully because like women have completely shown their cards in mass that like
Hmm.
we want this option and you are not going to take it away from us.
Yeah, I was just wondering about that earlier, and I was thinking about, Trump's picks for Supreme Court and all that. At the end of the day, even with that, the most it'll be is it goes back to the states. I think that was
Yeah.
Trump's original 60 Minutes interview there where they asked him about that. And, especially where I'm at, I don't, that is, I can understand, speaking against it or fighting against it. But yeah, practically speaking, it does not look like that's the case because women derive so much power from being able to have that sort of sexual power over men, being able to exercise it, and then being able to rid themselves of consequences or having
Yeah.
these sort of options to keep the sort of that appeal going without having to give it up if they did get pregnant, in a sense, and go through the whole pregnancy and have
Yeah,
the
it's
child.
it's so bad. I one thing that could curb I think if we're going to have a real conversation about curbing abortion is
Hmm.
if men were able to, I think they call it financially abort, to say like yeah, you can have the baby, but I am not going to support you financially if you do. Then, because some people argue like, well, no, that would mean we'd have way more abortions, blah, blah, blah. But I think I've heard people argue, and I agree that if that happened, women would be a lot more careful about who they're sleeping with and all of that. I
I
think.
think it goes down to if there's going to be actual accountability for the action. So if there's no
Yeah.
welfare and you can't go to the child support agency, then they might be a little bit more discerning about what they're going to do. Because if they end up in that position, that'd be really tough. But my opinion of that is that it's so against the state's interest because they would rather say, okay, we don't want welfare's here, but we'd rather have this guy paying the money, whether he sees
Mm,
the kid or not. So it's
yeah.
just unfortunately, it's like they always have that option for when they're ready. So once the fun's done and they're ready to lock someone down or do whatever, or they really want to have a kid, they'll choose. And it's
Mhm.
really weird because it's almost like we're in this kind of quasi like nomadic society where it's like, the maybe back then when the world population was really low and humans lived off just following a herd and maybe there was plenty of food and it didn't matter who you slept with because nobody really has property, so who's concerned about paternity that much? And it's like,
Mm.
you ever hear that phrase, you will own nothing and be happy, in the kind of way
Yeah,
that
when Schwab
society's
made
moving?
that, I think Charles
Yeah,
Schwab made that at some economic forum, made that comment.
yeah, and it's
Everybody
like,
went
well,
nuts.
are we moving to this kind of weird? It almost seems like that based off people's behavior because it's like, okay, there's a big, robust welfare state here.
Yeah.
People aren't really owning anything, they're not staying together, and it's just like this kind of sexual wantonness, I guess would be the word there.
Yeah.
So yeah, so long as you have those options, I feel like women have less of an incentive to be discerning about that stuff. But if there was actual consequences and thereby, accountability for a bad decision, they would learn real quick. I think any
Yeah.
human would, based off of
Well,
that.
and I think too, like I've heard this comment in some red pill spaces that every woman, like we're talking about with chivalry shifted from husbands to the state. Um, they're saying that every woman is in a polygamous marriage. And I thought that was kind of an interesting comment
I've heard that.
because the comment is every woman's married to the state and the husband.
Oh yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
and
I
so I
I've
thought that was
said
kind of interesting to think about like,
I've said
well,
this
I guess as
before.
far as like protection, provision, and that, like, yeah, the state will take care of the woman if.
Well, what I've kind of gave this metaphor, when I was talking with Dr. Baskerville and stuff, and
Mm,
it's almost like you're a family and you live in a house, but I want you to imagine like this big guy with his arms folded just sitting on your couch all the time, and that's pretty much the state just in your house. Like Big Brother state is always there, and
mm,
it's not just you and your family in the house. Like yeah, there's another guy there. It's the
yeah,
state pretty much ready to bully you when they
yeah,
want.
that's a good analogy. Yeah, man.
Yeah.
He says that the government, as a substitute husband, did for women what labor unions still have not accomplished for men. And I thought, wow, that's quite that's quite
Yeah.
alarming. They says men pay dues for labor unions, but the taxpayer pays dues for the feminists, and
Hmm.
ensuring that a chivalric society will take care of them.
He
And
says feminism and government soon become taxpayer supported women's unions. The political parties have become like two parents in a custody battle. I love that metaphor. Each
mm,
vying for their daughter's love by promising to do the most for her. How destructive to women is this? We have restricted humans from giving free food to bears and dolphins because we know that such feeding would make them despondent and lead to their extinction. But
yeah,
when it comes to our own species, we have difficulty seeing the connection between short term kindness and long term cruelty. We give women money to have more children, making them more dependent with each child and discouraging them from developing the tools to fend for themselves. The real discrimination against women then is free feeding. I thought
yeah,
that was a great metaphor because that's really what happens. I mean, there's just this option there, and humans tend to have this tendency sometimes to just take the path of least resistance, and then they have the most freedom. You can do whatever you want, have some kids, live off the government, sleep with this person, sleep with that person. It used to be with welfare too, back in like the 50s, where they would do these welfare checks, and if they went there and they saw, they would come like at the evening time, and if they saw that mom's was living with her boyfriend or whatever it was, and they
Mm,
would cut off the welfare and say, hey, well, there's a man in the house, and he needs to
mm.
do that. But then this became kind of like a civil rights issues, and certain cases later, there was some famous court cases that pretty much said no, they're entitled to receive this money, and it doesn't matter if boyfriend's living with them or not. And then the welfare rolls just went up a lot after that. So, yeah, they can have their cake and eat it too. You can be on welfare with this, you can be with this guy, be with that guy, do whatever. I mean, it's just you could see why they choose it, I guess. It's just maybe they feel like they got more freedom there, and it's just
Yeah.
it's hard for them to say no.
Yeah, man, it's so bad.
Ironically, when political parties or parents compete for females' love by competing to give it, the result is not gratitude, but entitlement. And the
Yes.
result should not be gratitude because the political party, like the needy parent, becomes unconsciously dependent on keeping the female dependent, which which turns the female into quote unquote the other, the person given to, not the equal participant. In the process, it fails to do what is every parent's and every political party's job, to raise an adult, not maintain a child. So this
Mm,
whole process of chivalry leads to entitlement. And it's funny because he's talking about the government, but you can see this in marriages too. Like if men are raised to be chivalrous husbands and they protect and provide and do everything in
yeah.
that regard, the wives become entitled to that. Then when they become chivalrous fathers to their daughters,
Mm,
they don't want any kind of roughness for their daughter, anything like that. And, oh my God, my daughter's crying. You treat the son way differently. I get it. But it also then brings them up with that same level of entitlement. It's just like this vicious cycle
mm.
of entitlement building in on itself until where we're at today.
Yeah, even the entitlement, like, I guess Florida just got rid of it somehow, miraculously, but to to have lifetime alimony for
You know what the thing about that is too, and just like California doesn't have lifetime alimony, okay, and Florida got rid of theirs, but you can end up paying lifetime alimony in California.
mm,
What they're doing in Florida is they're basically like you're allowed to challenge as the husband or bring it back up into court. So it's like the court maybe can't order lifetime alimony and you can't do anything about it, but they can order alimony indefinitely. But you have
mm,
the ability to file a motion and say, hey, when's this going to stop? When's this going to stop? But even in California, you can do that. But you could conceivably be paying lifetime alimony effectively if the court tells you to do that. But it's just you can challenge it and maybe they
okay.
will stop it, maybe they won't.
I mean, that's just so crazy to me when like women can get a job, women get preferential treatment in getting jobs. They
Yeah.
get preferential treatment in college positions, and it's like, how on earth? Like again, it's just the chivalry thing. Like, how can
Yeah.
they get all this preferential treatment at every turn? Like that has to somehow stop at some point.
Yeah,
It's just
at a certain
crazy to
point.
me.
Yeah, and I mean, the sort of getting up out of your seat and offering it to the woman as the good thing. What Peter mentions in here is that becomes this sort of affirmative action style. Okay, well, let's give up our seat at the job. Let's give up the job role. Let's give up
Mm,
the political seat or whatever it happens to be in favor of being chivalrous to give them to their, whether the merit is there or not. So it's kind of putting merit in the back seat, which is
yeah.
the issue. Now
But
I will
even like
say,
you said, though, even if the merit is there, like you said, so
Mhm.
you're going to tell everybody still the expectation is that the man is going, the law is structured so that the man is going to provide no matter
Yeah,
what. And then we give
that's
all
the
the men
part
have to
that,
compete for the same jobs with the
yeah,
women,
we're
and the
taking
women
half the
get
jobs.
preferential treatment to get those jobs in a lot of cases. So,
Yeah. And then they take the job and then they don't want to marry anybody who's making less like the men have been doing, or they don't even want to marry dang near across. For
mm,
them, they're still trying to marry up and all these
yeah.
kinds of stuff. So they end up, not wanting to go forward on that, or they feel like the men aren't being men. But it's like, what kind of standard can you hold them to? Again, you're taking half the jobs, you're
Mm.
expecting them to be providers. Of course, most men aren't going to be able to. There's only so many of those roles that men can conceivably get. And then
Yeah, I
everybody's
think
supposed to be
if
monogamous out here. So how's that going to work,
Well, do you see, like, I've seen this a little bit but I do wonder, like in my space, I'm in like engineering, and if you have a man and a woman that meet and they're both engineers
Uh-huh.
and they get married, so that's pretty much equal
Even, sure.
then. But in some cases, I've seen where I think because women are given preferential treatment and all turn like the man just stays home as the stay-at-home husband, blah
Yeah.
blah
If
blah.
she's making more.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Or even if they make the same, he may just choose to like, well, her career may go a lot farther than
Hmm.
mine. So,
Yeah.
you know,
That's a thing, and there's a discussion there. I think a lot of guys would be put off by that, especially chivalrous kind of men. It seems like that's something that happens sometimes where they make a decision
yeah.
to do that. And then all the same rules apply in family court. I mean, he can go in there and say, well, I gave up my career to watch the kids or be there or whatever. And there are a lot of women, it's still mostly men, but there is an uptick of women that are having to pay alimony and these kinds of things now, and they hate it when that happens. Like when I was working at child support, the women who had to pay child support were like the worst to deal with because they were just so angry about it. And it's just like, what do you expect? Like that's how it works. I mean, it's when
Yeah.
it comes to that, the financial aspect of this, it's not gender biased, it's provider biased pretty much. So,
Yeah, I was watching a 60
yeah.
Minutes where, I mean, they just had like the rare cases where the women have to pay that. And one of them was like a doctor, and she had to pay it because she made, a fantastic salary, and she had to
Hmm.
pay her husband. And she was on there just,
Yeah.
can you imagine? I have to
Yeah.
pay my husband, and I'm here at a job working. And all the
Welcome to
guys are
every
like,
guy's life.
yeah,
Yeah,
we
we
can
know.
imagine it.
Yeah. Yeah, most guys I spoke to were just consigned and they're like, well, yep, that's it. Like we all kind of knew the deal at that point. But yeah, women were just like, that's ridiculous. Like he can work. And it's yeah, I know, so can you. You know what I mean? So I I saw that so many times like in court. I mean with
Wow.
people I've spoken to also. So I don't know, and that's and we're kind of in this place where it's like if you're going to sign the state contract, it almost makes more sense to do that. I've told
Mhm.
people to do that, frankly. I mean, I'm just being honest. It's like, hey, if you got all this red pill game, why don't you go find a nice pharmacist out there or something, you know what I mean? And
Yeah. I've heard
and then
about guys doing
parlay.
that are like
Yeah.
really, man, who was I hearing? Yeah, it was something, but it was a guy that like his wife was, pretty high earner, and
Hmm.
he was good at cooking. He was really in shape. He had
Hmm.
game, and she loved being married to him. And he was a stay-at-home husband, but he just provided all the things that she liked. So,
I love when it's funny, there was a Twitter post. I wish I had it on hand, but it was a guy who pretty much he had to stay home and watch the kids for like a week or something happened. And while he was doing it, he had the realization. He's just like, I don't get it. This isn't that bad. I mean, I got all the kids to sleep. We just made dinner. Everything's fine. Like, what's everybody complaining about? Like, after like a few days, he was like, "Is this it?" You know what I mean? So it was just funny in that way because he's like,
well,
"Well,
yeah, but some of I was doing a book review with the Mountain Housewife on my channel, and
mhm. Oh, I think I've seen her before. I think I might have seen her on Twitter."
oh, really? Yeah, she's
Hmm.
great. Oh, I like
Yeah.
her a lot. But yeah, she was saying now because so many men know the workload at home because they have to do it uh,
Yeah.
with the kids, with the cleaning, with the cooking, with
Sure.
all that stuff.
Hmm.
The women don't really have that power over men anymore to say, you don't understand how hard it is.
No,
Most
she's
the
right.
modern husband is like, yes, I do. I'm doing it here.
Yeah, most people that I know that are married, it is like that. Both folks are doing it or they're helping out with that stuff, and it just
Yeah.
seems to go that way, especially if both people are working. I mean,
But
so that's
But
go
then
ahead, please.
the term we were talking about this too. The term that some of these women have come up with in the books is,
Mhm.
well, men don't carry the emotional load. The
Oh
women
gosh,
still
such a
have the
cop out.
emotional load on them, and the reason they do that is because you can't measure emotional load.
Yeah,
So
Exactly.
they can
Such a
complain
cop
about
out.
emotional load all day because you can't measure it. It's just something
I
that
got, yeah.
the
And it's
divine
just,
feminine has. Oh, the emotional load.
and
So
it's more just like, listen, sorry, but you got to get a hold of yourself, get a hold of your emotional world. That is really your business. And guys can sit here too. I mean, there's so many times where it's just like she's freaking out or having something, and men have to make sure she's in a good mood or whatever. And
yeah,
men have to do a lot of emotional labor,
there's
and
an emotional load. Yeah.
there is a plenty of instances of men out there sharing their experiences of when they finally do let their emotions out to their wife, and then their wife is like not attracted to them anymore. They just don't even, the wife doesn't even understand why.
Mm,
And it's like the minute that, like, the guy is supposed to be this emotional rock. It's funny because women will say, well, the emotional load, but it's like men very specifically have to be this emotional rock who just is this symbol of strength. And the
yeah.
minute he looks like he's panicking, it's all bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and most of the stuff men have to do, men actually have to put in more emotional labor keeping their emotions under control in order to get some of the stuff done that's required of us,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, that's what
So
even
the
so I'm
emotional
at
load,
this
come
is fun.
on.
So I'm at church on Sunday and
Yeah.
we're in like a small group discussion group at church um and one of the women, the older women, she's like, "Oh, you young moms, you're just at that stage of life, and oh, it's just so hard to be a mom." And I was like, "Nah, I'm not hearing that." So I piped up
Propaganda.
and I was like, "Yeah, if you think that's hard, you should try being a dad." And then her
Yeah.
husband's like, he's like, shut
Don't
up,
do it, man.
like
Yeah.
nah, nah, nah. And all the moms in my group were just like, they're like biting nails, like, and I was
Yeah.
like, hey. I said it, whatever. I mean, I guess you can have
Somebody
the
has
elders
to
call
say
me
it.
if you like it, whatever.
I applaud you for that. I will say there were probably a lot of husbands who got yelled out after that. Can you
I'm just,
believe
I'm
that
just
guy?
tired of the nonsense all the time. Like, give me a break.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, that part just freaking gets me. So there was another quote here that he brought in, and this was pretty much from a feminist, and it was just to drive the point home
Mm,
of how the recommendations for the state sort of assuming chivalry because the individuals doing it just wasn't enough. Like they needed the state. And that's from someone named John Stuart Mill, who was a champion of feminism. And he
yeah,
urged shifting of the responsibility for chivalry out of the hands of every man and into the legislative framework of government proper, contending that chivalry was not always reliable and must give way to a more reliable state enforced protection and benevolence toward women. There's a little
yeah.
bit of a few paragraphs here, but I'll just read the second paragraph.
Well,
The
hold on a
main
second
found
before you read that.
Sure.
So, John Stuart Mill, when he said that, I was like, wow, I didn't know. So, there's a book called the Worldly Philosophers
Hmm.
that I read a while back, and it was actually a recommendation by Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Poor
Okay.
Dad
Rich Dad,
guy.
Poor Dad.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
he said this was like an awesome book. So I was like, man, I should get that book. But anyway, it talks about the worldly philosophers, meaning these guys were economists. They were like the early economists talking about. So
Yeah.
it goes to like
That's what I
having,
thought he was because I recognized his name, but I was like, I
yeah,
thought he was the economist, but I wasn't sure.
yeah. So I was just blown away when he brought that up in the chapter of like John Stuart Mill said that about chivalry. Like
Yeah.
for an economy to work, like we need to bring this into it. Like, wow. But
Yeah.
yeah,
That's I was surprised by that also. I was like, because I thought I heard his name and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But yeah, he
yeah,
goes on to talk about sort of the moral influence that kind of gives rise to the spirit of chivalry of these different virtues like gentleness, generosity, self-abnegation towards the non-military and defenseless classes, and a special submission and worship. He uses the word worship directed towards women who are
whoa,
distinguished from the other defenseless classes by the high rewards which they had it in their power voluntarily to bestow on those who endeavor to earn their favor instead of extorting their subjection. And this could be anything from approval to probably sexual favors. And we learned from the last chapters that a lot of romantic chivalry is kind of rooted in this sort of extramarital
yeah. It's
affairs kind
adultery.
of deal. Yeah,
Yeah.
adultery. And then the second paragraph, he says the main foundations of the moral life of modern times must be justice and prudence, the respect of each for the rights of each other, of every other, and the ability of each to take care of himself. Chivalry left without legal check all those forms of wrong which reigned unpunished throughout society. It only encouraged a few to do right in preference to wrong, by the direction it gave to the instruments of praise and admiration. But the real dependence of morality must always be upon its penal sanctions, its power to deter from evil. The security of society cannot rest on merely rendering honor to right, a motive so comparatively weak in all but a few, in which on very many does not operate at all. So he wants to get this into like the penal system and have it really enforced, you know.
Yeah, which is like courtly love. Like that's what.
The, it's the feudalism model writ large, basically.
Yeah, it's
Um,
crazy. I couldn't believe that he said that, and they're like, "Wow."
yeah, so that kind of, it's interesting because then you can say, well, that takes away men's individual right to decide whether or not they want to be chivalrous or not. I mean, I guess you can, but for the most part, the state machinery is really pushing you to do that, whether it's from wealth transference or,
Yeah, which is
other
basically
things.
what we have now. Like,
Yes. Yeah. And then the next quote is from Ernest Belfort Bax, who confirms the chivalric behavior of both the left and right of politics was indeed, per Mill's suggestion, well underway by the year 1907. So this is
mhm.
over 100 years ago. All
Yeah,
parties, all sorts and conditions of politicians, from the fashionable and conservative West End philanthropist to the radical working men's clubite, seem or seemed until lately to have come to a unanimous conclusion on one point, to wit, that the female sex is grievously groaning under the weight of male oppression. So both the left and the right agreed on this. And it seems like you still kind of see that today, basically, whether it's the people on the right who are castigating men for being feminized and not stepping up to the plate, and these
mhm.
women are here waiting to start families. That was the Tommy Lauren, Laura Ingraham clip from I think last week or the week before that.
Yeah,
And then the other side is doing whatever they want and still basically blaming men and saying, well, if men were just doing better, not to mention that women are taking these seats from men, or the state is giving it to them.
yeah,
They're taking a lot of these jobs and they're still expecting men to somehow step up and do all this stuff. It doesn't even make sense from a economic point of view. Most men aren't going to be able to do that, unfortunately.
yeah. They're not, and yeah, you look at all that, and you're like, man, how do we get the mess? How do we untie the Gordian knot?
I hate to say it, whenever I look at this stuff and I I can't help but think this, and it's just like it's always when men go on like a marriage strike or just walk away from it basically is what gets their attention. You can play into it, you can try to be the Bugatti driving guy and make all this money. They want to see that. They want to see you
Yeah,
paying more taxes and making as much and giving the money to women and doing all this stuff and stimulating the economy and going to the club and buying overpriced drinks and whatever it happens to be,
yeah,
chasing this. But when men finally say, I think we're at the point where we're just overpaying so much that the disrespect is just palpable, and I think
mhm.
we're okay, and they walk away or they kind of abstain, then it's just like, where are the men at? Why aren't the men being men? And they start panicking, and then they start looking at it, and it's like if men kind of hold fast, I guess you can say, or hold the line on this, I think it will have at least some impact, to try to get them looking at it.
Yeah, and I know Paul Elam talks about that with like, well, what are we going to do? Is there a marriage strike? And he's like, yeah, there is a marriage strike, and yeah, men are walking away,
Hmm.
and like I was just watching something from him today, and he was saying like, and it's going to get really bad really fast for especially for women
Hmm.
because he was I mean, this is almost hard to imagine, but he's saying like you're going to have a generation of men that are not interested in, protecting and providing for women. And there may be a generation of innocent women, but the holdover from their moms and grandmas that propagated all of this, they're going to be bearing the brunt of it
Oh yeah,
in
I know what you
society.
mean. Just like younger generation is going to have to encounter this sort of new mindset of men, so to speak, and they've
Yeah.
kind of inherited the sort of sins of their mothers, so to
Yeah,
speak.
and I think he was saying that like you could really see at a point in the future coming probably sooner than anyone wants to believe that like men just stepping over like women in the street who are just homeless and just there and they just don't care. And it's like,
Yeah.
wow, that that blows my mind that that would be.
Yeah, I think a lot there's definitely a lot of guys who are getting there. And it's kind of tough because, I think a lot of us did kind of grow up that way. So like I hate to say it, part of me, like if it's in the moment, I'll probably like instinctually, or I don't even know, like maybe I will or whatever. But the other part of me is like, I'll just keep driving. You know what I mean? This doesn't involve me. You know?
Yeah, because we always think of
Yeah.
homeless people as like men who are bums, and
Yeah.
like, wow, I don't know. That just seems kind of crazy.
And I don't even know if it's
Um,
instinctually, if it's more just like because the what they really use to tighten the leash around you is the concept of masculinity and the shaming of, oh, you're not a man, and
yeah,
a real man would have done this. But the more guys tend to just maybe get so sick of this and say, I'm not concerned with what their definition of being a man is anymore.
yeah.
They're gonna
Well, and
move
part
into
of that was
something
being
new.
in like a tight society too. But if society is so fragmented and
Yeah.
individualist,
Like I
then
don't know these people. There's the
yeah,
cops. If the state wants to do it, just I'll call the cops. You know what I mean? Like, hey, something's
yeah.
going on over there. No, I didn't stop. I got you on Bluetooth. I'm on the freeway now, actually.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's
Yeah.
just hard to imagine. But anyway, he says feminism draws its strength from chivalry, which I've
Mhm.
said, this is a quote from Dalrock,
Yeah.
that feminism is the parasite that feeds on the back of chivalry, right? Like it has
Yeah.
to have chivalry there or else it
Its roots
dies.
go into, yeah, I think this is an important point because I think a lot of people don't understand this even nowadays. And I hate to say, I'm glad we're doing a discussion on this book, only because when people hear chivalry, even people in the manosphere, I think a lot of people, like a lot of the younger folks, still don't really understand exactly the implications of chivalry and its relation to feminism. And
Yeah.
feminism, people will say feminism is the problem, but it's like, okay, yes, if you stamped out feminism tomorrow and chivalry and gynocentrism is still there, feminism will be back,
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
soon. Its roots are in chivalry. That's what enables it to
Mm,
really take hold
yeah.
so much.
We
So,
need, like I was saying, we need a biblical shift of like, no, women open doors for men because they are to reverence. Well, this is wives to husbands,
yeah,
but you got to start practicing somewhere. But they are to
sure. Yeah.
reverence their husbands. And and scripture also says that the man was not created for the woman, but the woman for the man. That's
Oh,
First
yeah.
Corinthians 11, right? So if that's in chivalry, it's almost the reverse, that men are here to serve as women.
Yeah. It's
And
like replacing, you can say maybe you bring up the biblical understanding, of God there, and it kind of shifts it over to a goddess. I mean, they're using words like worship women, right?
yeah,
I mean, it's almost religious kind of a co-opting of a, religious section of your mind or something like that, and putting
yeah,
it over to this divine feminine, we hear that, or the women are goddesses. I mean, they use this
yeah.
kind of religious language, right? So
Yeah,
there's
I mean,
there's
it's even
something
in the
to that.
church, even like, oh,
Yeah.
you mothers are just so wonderful. Oh, you just have it so hard. Oh,
Yeah.
all this stuff. Like, get out of
That
here.
Yeah, and it's just there's this real sort of, and it's again, I look at this, it's almost hard to blame the woman. I mean, if you're growing up in that culture, it's like, how do you not become entitled? I don't know. It's like they're
Oh,
begging you to. It's very hard, and at least
yeah,
it seems that way. And then on the other side, how are men supposed to, men might have this diminished view of themselves and they don't value themselves in the same way, except for these very few
mm,
utilitarian things that I guess they would consider their manhood on, like, are you doing this, or your duties to everybody else, but what do
yeah.
you get out of it, so to speak?
I think it's men are so steeped in chivalry that even like, let's see, Pearl
Mhm.
Davis was debating Lila Rose, yeah. And she
Yeah, I
was
saw
saying
that. That
like,
was
well,
good.
married men are happier than, single men or cohabitate men, blah, blah. And Pearl just wasn't buying that, blah, blah. But I think I would argue like, no, because we have been inundated with chivalry for so long, I think like a
Mhm.
man needs to be this plow horse.
Yeah.
Like, well, I'm sacrificing for my family and my wife and blah blah blah. And if I'm not doing that, then I'm just not happy because like my mind tells me I have to do this, you know?
Yeah, she had an interesting argument. She said, "No, well, women just select for happy men. You know,
Well, that
yeah,
could be
married
too.
men are happier, but women typically just want to be around men who are already happy." And then, on the other end of that, I saw an interesting study. This was probably a year and a half ago. I did a video on this, but Ben Shapiro was talking about who guys who weren't married have a higher chance of dying from a drug overdose than men who were married. And I thought it was so interesting that he was focusing on drug overdoses. I was like, that's an interesting. I was like, what about like guys taking, pulling the plug on themselves, so to speak? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when I looked at that data, single men who were never married had a slightly higher chance than married men to do that. But divorced guys, it was like way
Oh,
higher.
oh
You
yeah.
know what I mean? So it
Yeah.
was almost like, well, if you don't get married, you have a way lesser chance of going down that road than if you end up getting divorced. So
Yeah.
I was just like, oh well, now that's why he didn't say it because that would kind of, reveal what he was trying to avoid there. One thing I noticed about Lila Rose also was that I think it was part of the conversation where um Pearl was asking about like what do men get from marriage or something, and she seemed to focus on the love aspect of marriage and like, well, two people love each other and this and that. And it just reminded me of like the love match versus the dowry. And it seems like there was still this emphasis on love and kind of being the primary driver. She mentioned other stuff like religious stuff too, but the love part, I remember her kind of mentioning that, and I was like,
Well,
oh,
that's
okay,
where I
that's
like Pearl calling her out on being a fake TradCon because I've done a couple videos on Lila Rose. I think like one when she was on the whatever podcast or whatever.
yeah,
But
that's where
she
I saw her
presents
before.
herself as a Christian woman coming from a Christian point of view. I'm not going to judge whether she's a Christian or not, but I'm telling her she does not have a Christian point of view. She has a
She seems
romantic,
chivalrous. Yeah,
yeah,
romantic
yeah, she has
chivalry
a
point of view.
romantic love point of view, which is not biblical marriage.
Well,
She
it's interesting. Sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and, like I called that out at least once, maybe a couple times with her and like what she says marriage is and blah blah blah. And I'm like, no, time out. That is not what scripture says marriage is here. So
Yeah.
just to be clear, you may be a good person, you may be I'm sure she's a sincere Catholic woman. She does not have biblical marriage when she talks about it,
I
though.
I think I'm sure she is. Yeah, she seems like a good person to me. But it's funny. It's the chivalry because they were discussing abortion early on, and I know we were talking about that earlier, and
Mm,
it was like she was like, abortion's murder.
yeah.
Okay, but then it went to and people should be punished for that the same way as murder.
Which I
But then
don't
it
think
went.
she believes that. I've seen her on other shows. She does not really believe that we're going to punish women. Like,
Well, that's what I was getting at because then it became, but it's also important to recognize that so many women are coerced into getting abortion. And it was like, okay, so you want it to be this, but then you want to give women the ultimate get out of jail free card, which is like, well, I
mhm.
was coerced. So it's like anyone who does that, it's going to be like, I was coerced. I was coerced. Like if they're facing a
Yeah.
murder charge for this, well, I was coerced. I was pressured into doing this. So it's like, it came from a very chivalrous perspective of like the women being, these pure moral beings
Oh
who
yeah.
must have this out, and it was this mean guy, you know what I
Mhm.
mean, who forced her to do this.
Yeah.
um
No, really, the shows that I've seen her on, I've done at least two videos on her. She does not believe in any show I've ever seen that
yeah,
women should be punished for this.
yeah, and
And
women
that's
will
why I was surprised
vehemently.
on Pearl's show. She said, "Oh yes, blah blah." I really don't believe she thinks that. I think
Yeah,
she
no,
was,
it
yeah,
wouldn't. I just don't see it happening. And then the ironic part is like women will vehemently argue for their right to be able to do that, and it's my body, my choice, and this and that, and it's like they will outright tell you no, they want to. But on the
Mhm.
other end, it's like you're gonna make sure that there's this out for women built into it. I just was like, oh, see, that's the chivalry really just coming in way too
Yeah, no,
hard
and
there.
she, and even most pro-life, like I was a pastor I really like to listen to. There was, I think it was North Dakota, came this close to passing to making abortion illegal in their state, and
Hmm.
it was a pro-life group that was headed up by this woman. I forgot her name, but they lobbied incredibly hard for abortion not to become illegal in that state. And it was like, this is the
Interesting.
pro-life group. Like, what?
I wonder why they did that. That is kind of that's very strange.
When I think, if I remember right, part of
Or
it was
they were
because they were
afraid it
going
would
to
come
punish
down too hard
women.
on women. Yeah, that would
Yeah, I
make
think they were
sense.
going to punish women who did it. And
Yeah.
that's where this pro-life group was like, oh, no, wait a minute. No, no, no. We can't punish women. Like, no, no,
Yeah,
that's
wow.
this out.
I shouldn't be surprised, but it's
But it was
I,
just
I mean,
crazy. Like, oh,
yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did want to maybe read the last paragraph here. I know we're kind of this chapter is a little shorter.
Yeah.
Gynocentric chivalry was an unbalanced idea to begin with. Men are slowly backing away from the custom, and we can yearn for the day government on both sides on the political fence does the same. Perhaps when the world's growing army of grass eaters brings about a collapse in revenue, they will see the light. In the meantime, and he has grass eaters there in italics, as that's what they kind of look at us as. In the
Mm.
meantime, let's not give feminists a pass on their claim to have walked away from chivalry. They have merely found a new source. And that
Mm.
new source is the government. And it
The
kind of
government.
makes me wonder if, we see like Democrats spending money to try to get, influence into this male voter bloc to hopefully win some of them back.
Yeah.
And I mean,
It
do you
won't
think
work.
maybe you don't think that's what because I wonder, like, well, if they're going to view men as a voting bloc in the same way that they view women, will they offer a real olive branch, or will it just be,
They
you know,
can't. Like, it's antithetical to their entire platform.
yeah,
Like, there's no
it's so
way.
gynocentric.
Yeah, yeah,
I
there's
think you're
no
right.
way. Now, Republicans are gynocentric too, but
Yeah,
Democrats,
very
it's
true.
like so blatantly
Yeah.
gynocentric that whatever is good for women, we do, blah, blah, blah. And not good for women, but whatever women want, we're doing for sure. Whatever advantages women over men, we are doing it. It's like there's no way they can do that with the platform that they have. They would have to completely transform the entire party, which they're not going to
There,
do.
there's a great paragraph actually right before this one where he says uh, all this complements of feminism's pressuring the left and right into chivalric leadership. The
Mm.
only difference between the two sides of politics is that the left is more sycophantic in its deliverance of chivalric rule, and the right more heroic in its deliverance of chivalry. Same
Mm.
gynocentrism, different night. So that's literally what you were just explaining. The left is
Yeah.
so
Oh,
so in your face about it, and then the other side's, very like heroic and sword and shield and protect my lady and everything like that. Yeah, that's what I wonder, because it's just like, well, okay, it's like men would have to walk away from both parties really, in order to try to get something going. It does seem pretty bleak though, I'll say that.
well, I think it could turn quickly though. That I mean, it'd have to be the Republican Party because there's no way the Democratic Party could do it. But like in South Korea, I don't. In their latest election, they were saying that their parties are dividing on gender lines. There, I don't
Mm.
know if you saw anything with
I
that.
heard recently that the like super pro feminist one just won, or it was kind of a loss for men, but they almost there was kind of this big divide, but I think unfortunately the sort of
Yeah.
pro woman one, the most pro woman one won again. So it
Well, I
was
guess
like,
I hadn't heard that. I just had heard like they are, it's like one of the few countries where you're starting to see this divide of the
oh, the
parties
divide is
fighting.
very pronounced there. I did see that. I saw like the political graphs for they were like the most spread apart ideologically between genders as far as it
Yeah.
goes.
I was
Um,
like, wow, that is very
they
interesting.
also have one of the lowest birth rates too.
Yeah, they have the lowest birth.
Probably
I used to
not
live in South
coincidentally.
Korea, which is kind of sad.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
I taught English
Um,
there for a year,
wow.
which was a
Yeah,
cool experience. Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting, and this is kind of why I like, reading about the dowry and stuff so much, because it at least puts some burden on the other side, or at least reminds us of what it was like kind of before chivalry really, dug its claws into marriage completely and gave us the love match, so to speak.
Mm.
Um, I think ultimately men on some individual level, if they can maybe see a lot of this stuff and understand it, that will give us the biggest impact, and how they look at marriage, and if they look at it differently with different expectations. I think if we can ever achieve a collective, understanding or change there,
Yeah.
That would probably be step one there.
Yeah. 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 Boy,
I
I
like to be
mean,
very optimistic about that, I'll
yeah,
say.
the immediate future doesn't look so good. Especially again with Paul Elam talking about the
Mm.
number of men who are pursuing relationships. Now,
Yeah,
maybe the data was just, bunk. I don't know.
it
But
could
if it
be.
was true what he was saying of how it was like, whoa, we are in a major problem if men are just not interested in dating women.
Yeah. And it's one thing if you could say, oh, it's just guys who are having trouble finding a job, but when there's guys out there that are making good money and they seem to be doing well, and they aren't doing it because they don't want to risk whatever they've built up or whatever it happens to be. And then like it's just like, oh man, like you know what I mean? Y they could afford it, so to speak, but they're just like, no, no, it's still a bad deal to them, you
Well,
know?
I wonder if part of it's too. So back when I was younger, so I'm in my early 40s, but when I was
Mhm.
younger, Harley Davidson, you couldn't get a Harley Davidson motorcycle. The way they sold a Harley Davidson was they just
Mhm.
set it out in the showroom and somebody would come and buy it same day. Like you were on a 2-year waiting list to get
Wow.
a Harley Davidson motorcycle. This is back in like the later 90s, right?
Okay.
So if you have a product that people want, you don't need
Oh
to sell
yeah.
it.
Yeah, you don't need to sell it. People
It'll
will
sell
come in there
itself.
and buy it. Yeah. It's
So
so
that just
good.
makes me wonder, like, is part of it like, well, the dating, I hear that these are, well, the dating apps are so bad and the men can't get women on the dating apps because they filter and blah, blah, whatever. And
Mm.
I just wonder though, it could be that, yeah, that could be totally legitimate, but is it also that the modern woman is so masculine and so devoid of any femininity that the product is just not selling? Like men are just not
Yeah,
interested.
it's not selling because what they get, it's like they can get that outside of marriage, or again, it's this problem of like, what have you been doing from 18 to 29? And they know what they've been doing. They've seen that. And it's like, okay, so I gotta catch a falling knife,
Mm,
basically. And it's like, if we're all dealing with these women, like they have to come with something or some kind of deal that's gonna be what else about you is different that I'm gonna get from marrying you that you haven't already given here and that I might even get less of if I'm married to you?
yeah.
What is that going to be? And at least it's like, well, she's been around, she's done all this stuff, but at least, not to sound like I'm so crazy, like, oh, let's bring the dowry back, but it's like if she came with something like that, like, okay, the person who married her at least got this, or she
Yeah.
came with this contribution or something. But you can't even do that because you're just the next guy who's just kind of overpaying for her, so to speak. It's
Well, I'm just
it's
talking about
yeah.
like not necessarily like what she bring, but
Mhm.
is she bringing like if you've ever been for me it's rare today uh
Yeah.
to be around women like this, but man, when you get around a woman who is very feminine, there's
Oh,
just
sure.
like
Just demure, and you're just like, wow, what a woman, or something like
yeah,
that.
like the aroma around her is femininity. One is very rare,
Sure.
but two,
Yeah.
that energy is just so intoxicating.
I hear you. Yeah, I know what you
But
mean.
I'm just saying, like, I think we are so egalitarian and women are trained to be so masculine from the time they're
Hmm.
3 years old that
Yeah.
I just wonder if that's part of the reason as well that like men don't want to be in a relationship with another dude. Like they want that femininity. Like if
Well,
you
yeah,
watch
and
old movies, I don't maybe the women were just
oh yeah,
acting in those movies.
sure.
But if you watch those old movies from like the 50s and 60s, like wow, there's just, I mean,
A
it's like
lot of
these women
guys will
are,
report if they travel to a different place. And I know this isn't the answer. It's not like you can just travel and then, a lot of guys bring them back here and then they become the same thing. But,
yeah,
guys, you can look at old movies or sometimes you can go to a place that's in a very different part of the world and
mm,
guys will report like, gosh, it's so different. And I've even noticed that, just from, I've dated, I've used the apps, and there were a few times where I've matched with some foreign women. I mean, one, I could think of somebody from South America right now, and I remember thinking, God, the whole conversation's different. It's like, it's not like
oh,
pulling teeth. I mean, it was just like oh wow, look, there's this mutual respect. Like they're not leaving me hanging on. It was just something different. So I do know what you're saying. Yeah, there is such a thing as like when you kind of see that for the first time and you're just like, oh, that fits right there. That makes a lot of sense, you know. And you know
Yeah.
what they're selling now is like, yeah, well, you know, they're gonna be enculturated or they got the whole sleeve tattoo or whatever it is, then magically they're supposed to change once you start paying for everything and they stay home. And
Yeah.
no guy's really buying that. Like, really? You know, and then that great dragon raises its head again after the eighth year of marriage, and
Yeah.
you're dealing
I
with
think,
that, you know?
you know, Fresh and Fit,
Hmm.
Byron, he has such an awesome analogy when a woman says that, like, well, I'll stop being masculine if I could find the right man to put me in my feminine, then I would
Yeah. Oh
stop being
gosh.
this boss babe. And he's like, yeah, yeah, that's like a guy saying, hey, yeah, on Tuesdays I like to put lipstick on and high heels and wear a dress, but if I could find a woman that was really feminine, I wouldn't do that
Yeah,
anymore.
I'll be
He's
in
like,
my
"Would you be
masculine.
interested in that guy?" And they're like, "What? Are you crazy?" Like,
Well, yeah, that's the thing. And if it's supposed to be natural, like if you're selling it as it's supposed to be natural to begin with, then it's like, what do you mean you need this to do that? It's just another cop out. It's another cop out to just blame men. That's all I hear from that. Still blaming men. I'm just looking at it from like, okay, if the majority of people are like this, ultimately I have to parlay and negotiate with these people. What is the deal with me having to put up with that might be worth me taking? You know what I mean? So it's like
yeah,
it's that's the tough part because it's like if there's comparatively a rare amount of those people around, um, it's like, well, you know, there's just everybody else seems to be kind of bought into the stuff, and it's like, okay, how do you handle that? You know, now some
mm,
guys just choose to only engage in short-term stuff with them, but it's like if you were going to do something long-term, what would it look like
yeah.
in a way that at least has some protection for the guy or makes it worth it for the guy a little bit in case the worst happens, you know?
So you're
But then they look at
saying
you. Sorry, go on.
I think you're saying though one strategy could be get in good shape, learn some game, and then be the stay-at-home husband who
Or
find yourself a nice pharmacist or something.
yeah,
And
or just find someone that brings something, whether it's stay-at-home husband or not. I mean, listen, if that's you, then the divorce laws are going to be on your side. I'll tell you that right now. And I'll be honest, like I've seen that, and I've seen those guys make out like bandits. If that's what they want to do, then you can
mm,
understand how much power that person has, you know, in
yeah,
that situation. But yeah, I mean, I've just read too many divorce judgments to take the sort of tradcon deal myself. It's like I have to, and I'll be honest, it's like I get it. Like it would be tough. I can meet someone and think, oh man, maybe it's worth walking through the fire on this one or gambling it. But it would be gambling it, you know, for me. That's what it would be.
yeah,
But I personally, if I was gonna do that, I would be looking for someone that brings something. Or it's like if you're both getting married at 30, it's like, what have you saved? You went to college,
mm,
you got the job. Like you don't even have $60,000 sitting here. Like, what are we dealing with here? Like, let's figure this out. Okay, you want to stay home for a few years while the kids are small and then go back to work or whatever. Maybe I
yeah.
can do that for you, but you're not coming with anything. You know what I mean? Come on. All right, get your dad on the phone. Hi, Mr. So and so. You know what I mean? Nothing from you. Okay, get grandpa on the phone. Get grandma on the phone. We need to have a family meeting here. Like, what is the deal? What have you guys been doing this whole time? I feel like family, you know, it really is a project. It's like, it, you know, the dowry system is interesting because it's almost like there's like these built-in cultural checkpoints for each family. And it's
Mm,
like, you get to this point of your daughter's marriage, and it's like, okay, how well have you been doing this project of family? Working together, saving, getting this
mm,
figured out for her, planning for your kids' futures. And if the answer is like, no, we've just been buying things on credit and kind
yeah.
of hanging out, it's like, oh, that's not really going to work here, you know? So I
Yeah, and I
just
think
believe in
that's
putting
gonna
pressure back on their side, you know? I think
yeah,
as,
and I agree. Like, I think that's gonna work even less as we go into 2030, twenty
mm-hmm,
forty. Like I've been even, I've got 5 kids. I've been thinking, I was talking to my wife about that a lot. Even, I mean, some of the stuff you've been talking about, Shaw, with how, we can help them as much as possible. It was, yeah, I think it's going to get tougher and tougher and tougher as
Yeah.
you
I I
go
personally
on.
think, a woman left a comment on one of my videos. She saw me on my interview with Pearl, and she
Mm,
was talking about, she was like, "Wow, I really like the interview, and I'm glad someone's talking about the dowry." This is an American woman, and she's just like, "I've actually been saving a dowry for my daughter." And we had a couple back and forth comments, and I really like, to me, it would actually be interesting to see, because I bet somebody, like, the first person who does that is gonna see a difference of what the marriage market looks like for them when they finally enter and to start looking for matches. They will
mm,
People would be surprised. They'd be like, "Oh, really? Okay, that's interesting." They're gonna look at you differently. I really think whoever
mm.
tries that first and will be very pleasantly surprised with the results, because I think the environment's kind of like,
Yeah.
it would be like shocking. People would be like, "Oh, really? That's impressive." You know what I mean? I think that, like, that woman that said that, I was just like, "You're gonna see this pay off. You're going to see that pay off when it's her time." Her daughter
Yeah.
was like young, so she's beginning to save. And it's like, hey, after each year you're putting something away, once she's 20 years old someday, 21, 22, whatever it is, that's gonna make a big difference for her.
Well, do you think an IRA counts then if she brings that?
I I I really look at it as something that can get put into the house, because it's really about setting up the household, I think, is the big thing. And that's like the
Mm.
big
Oh, yeah,
flex,
that's true. Yeah.
And then usually both of their names are going to be on the house. So it's like, if the investment comes in and it gets put into the house, and even if she stays home and the guy's paying on it, like, yeah, he can still end up losing a bit in the end. But if it does split,
Mm.
there's more incentive for her to stay and for them to work it out and just be equally invested, which is the thing that really undoes chivalry, is this equal skin in the game type thing.
Oh,
So
yeah. Yeah, that's
that's
true.
that's kind of how I look at it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, actually, I just did a video on Dr. Phil
Mhm.
having these thruples on where now, of course, you couldn't have a man with two wives, so it was one wife with two husbands. And they were saying how this works really well for them because
Uh,
they couldn't have the house that they do and blah,
yeah,
blah, blah if they didn't have this like open relationship with
gosh.
one
See,
wife,
that's the other
two.
thing.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. I mean, there's so much of this and stuff like that going on. It is just, see, that's why when people say, like, "Oh, do you want to bring the dowry back?" Like, I think it'd be interesting to see, but we are seeing so many just different things now, especially with the technology we got and what people are doing. It's even California law, again, they changed
Mm.
California law while I was at child support, so you can have multiple parents for one child, and it's to accommodate this polyamorous
Yeah,
type
that's what it,
relationship. I
yeah,
think I
yeah.
mentioned
'Cause I
that to you
mean, the
before.
guy, I was just so stupid. Like, so it was there was a couple that was married originally, and then the woman said,
Mhm.
"Well, I want to pursue other romantic relationships, even though I still love you, Bob, or whatever." And so,
Yeah,
okay. And so then she brings a boyfriend into the home, and he lives with them, and he helps raise their two kids that they have. But
yeah.
with this boyfriend, I was like, "What kind of
Now,
simp are you?
if the
Why
court
are
looked at
you?
that,
What's that?"
if California court was looking at that, and let's say, this kid was let's say this kid's 1.5, 2 years old when the new boyfriend moves in, and they're calling both of these guys dad, and then the relationship splits up. This polycule, I think is what they call it, splits up when the kid's like 8 or 9, or there's two kids, 8, 9, 10, whatever. The court could look at that and say, okay, you guys all cohabitated together. All three of you are legal parents. So this third guy has the right to ask for custody. And this third guy also has to pay child support, depending on what the custody arrangement is at the time. So it all goes off of cohabitation and the relationship with the kid. So if you're doing this, it, it,
He's at risk.
yeah, yeah. So it's new basically, and we're kind of seeing how that goes, but it's a free for all out. This is why I'm like, oh god, it's almost like we're in like these weird nomadic times again. Not weird, but just like nomadic in the sense of like it's a free for all out there in some ways. So
Well, I mean, you could clearly tell
yeah.
that the woman was in charge of all of these relationships and all this
Oh,
stuff.
I
It's
bet.
just like
Yeah.
I was asking, like, boy, does two betas make an alpha then? If you haven't been the
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you got one guy for every aspect of what you need there. I don't know. It's a strange thing also. And see, this goes into birth control having an effect on society and abortion being an option because it's like people can remove these kinds of incidents where if someone gets pregnant, so they can sit here and they can say, well, I can do this or I can indulge in this and I can do that and I can mitigate these consequences based off of that. And I mean, for tradcons and conservatives to undo this, yeah, it is a very uphill battle.
Yeah.
Times would have to get pretty
Yeah.
rough, I think, to bring stuff back. God, that's a pessimistic place to end this on, huh? I'm
Yeah.
sorry, everybody.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't it'll get better. It may get
Yeah,
worse before it gets better though. So yeah.
you're right.
It's
It's gonna get better. It's
I
gonna
just
get better.
think, and I've told you this before, I just think with the birth rate, I think that's going to just cause some crazy problems in the
Yeah,
future.
I remember you mentioning that. Yeah, you're
So,
right.
yeah. But this plays into the birth rate. They're like nobody's getting together and nobody's having kids and blah blah blah.
Mhm.
So yeah. Anyway, well, Shaw, I better get moving here. Um,
Cool.
chapter 3 was good. Thanks for sitting down with me again here.
Yeah, no worries. No worries.
Well, that was This Is Shaw on the channel. Boy, that was a good chapter. Good stuff here. I'm glad we got that conversation going. And things do look a little bleak with the outlook, but we got to keep in mind that Christ is winning. He is building His church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Until next time, this is the Post Millennial Man.